Hi everyone, I'm Allyson Gavaletz. I'm a bookseller here at Barnes& Noble. Today I'm talking with Eowyn Ivey about her book Blackwood's Blue Sky, which is out now, and I'm so excited to talk to you. This is a very interesting and fun book, and I loved a lot of the characters and the placement and all of that, so I cannot wait to talk to you about it. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Allison. I'm really looking forward to talking with you.
Yeah, thanks. So this book to me is a love story of various forms. I feel like there's so many different love relationships in it. But overall, I think it's a love story to Alaska, which I know is where you are right now and where you live. You paint the most beautiful picture of it in this book, and that goes through to the characters. The people who live there are really entrenched and don't want to leave it. And later on, even we'll talk about this later, but even Emiline comes back and really embraces it. How do you view the book?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I feel like it's kind of I've referred to it as my complicated love song to Alaska. Because I do love it here. I think like a lot of kids when I was like middle school, junior high age, I thought I can't wait to get out of here. I think a lot of us feel that way about where we grow up. And then I left and went to a university in Washington State at Western Washington University for 4 years. My husband and I were down there, and I just missed Alaska so much. And I think that was when I realized how much of a part of it is of me and how much it needed to be a part of my writing as I went forward.
It's so beautiful there. And you can just, like, I was just picturing it as I mean, and it's also a place that you can't fully picture. You know, like you think you can and you see photos, but it is a place. I've only been to one small part of it, but like
Oh,
you are just like, oh, this is amazing. So it does come across in the book, even though you can't fully fathom it.
yeah, right, right.
Emmeline, we've got to talk
Mhm.
about her. She is
Yeah.
so sweet. She's so
Oh,
sweet. And she's so reliant on her mother, Birdie, who's
yeah.
doing the best that she can as a young single mother. And this is such kind of a throwaway line, maybe to you, but to me, it really stuck out. And it's towards the beginning when Emmeline and Birdie are just hanging out, and Birdie's talking about her flannel pajamas that are a little itchy, but that Emmeline wanted to wear her matching pajamas while they're watching a movie. And I just
Yeah.
kept that through the whole story. And I just think it's so sweet because it's the simplest things with
Yeah.
kids that
Yeah.
resonate with them the most. And it was just so touching. And can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. No, I'm so thrilled. It makes me happy and it makes me realize how frankly how well you've read the book that you're focused on Emmeline because she to me is the heart of the story. It's really her origin story in a way, how she came to be, how she comes to be who she is ultimately. And I feel like that connection, that longing for connection. And I feel like that when you talk about love being a theme through it, I think it's love sometimes a longing for a closer connection that we sometimes can't have, whether it's with our parents or with a partner. It's that sort of yearning for a closer connection, I think. And certainly Emmeline feels towards that, her mom. And I appreciate your compassion towards Birdie too. She is not by any means a perfect mother, but I wanted to write that kind of character. So
Yeah, they were both very sweet. I mean, obviously the story starts and you see that Birdie is, trying and maybe not succeeding in the way that she wants to, in the way that people around her want to. But as you keep reading, she really is just trying her best, you know.
yeah, thank you for acknowledging that. I really appreciate
Yeah.
that.
Continuing about Birdie, she really is someone who does what she wants and just goes for it. And I think
Yeah.
she's very brave. But no one really pictures her and Arthur getting together. And in fact, most people tell her to stay away, but she doesn't listen. Can you speak to their connection a little bit?
Yeah, I think you've nailed something with Birdie in the terms of that she wants to do what she wants to do, but she's not exactly sure what that is, right? I think as young people we struggle to kind of find where we think happiness is going to be, where we're going to go looking for it. And I think that's her attraction to Arthur. I think before she even knows the whole sense of who he really is, she's drawn to him because he emanates, I think, the Alaska wilderness, and that's really what she's drawn to and wants to feel closer to. So I think that's and I think you're right. I think she's hoping also to be she's working towards being a better mom, even as she's in ways failing at it. And I think she also envisions that as part of, being with Arthur, being out in the woods as a way that she can hopefully, bring more happiness to Emily ultimately, I think is what she's hoping for.
Yeah, there's a line. This wasn't even in my questions, but as you're talking, I remember that because I laughed at this because I live in New York City, which is obviously an extremely urban area. But there's one part where Birdie's talking and she's at work and she's looking out over the mountains and she's like, people always think that where we live is rural. Tourists come and they think this is rural, but she's like, that's rural. And I laughed because I was like, no, girl, you're rural.
Well, it's
But
funny you say that because it's something I'm very aware of when I talk to people from other places, because I got to be careful about bragging about living out in the middle of nowhere. When you live in Alaska, there's always someone who lives more extreme, more out there than you do. So like we're on the road system, we're not in what we call bush Alaska. We can drive to Anchorage, right? So for me, I feel like I live in I would almost call it the suburbs, but if you actually could see where I live, I think most people would be like you say, no, that
yeah. Yeah,
it's
you're
all
as rural.
relative.
Yeah, it is all relative, but it made me laugh. But it showed that like even that early, she was craving something else that she kind of looked longingly over there and was like, oh, that's rural. That like called to her even that early before she went anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
Back to Arthur and Bertie, it does seem that they are made for each other. They both wonderfully enjoy the solitary lifestyle. They are truly creating their own family and do not feel pressured to let anyone in. And at the cabin, Bertie says, and I quote, with her head rested in the warm crook of Arthur's arm and her daughter playing nearby, Bertie knew this was the life she had dreamed of for them. And I think that's all that anyone wants.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it was so sweet. And it also, another thing that kept running through my head as I was reading this is I don't know if you're familiar with this Dr. Seuss quote, but it's one of my most favorites. So I mean this when I say it in
Okay.
a very complimentary way. But the quote is, we are all a little weird and life's a little weird. And when we find someone whose weirdness is compatible with ours, we join up with them and fall in mutual weirdness and call it love.
No, I love that. Yeah, I think you're right. In ways, Bertie and Arthur suit each other so well. Like neither one of them until now has really found someone that matches their energy and their desires and what they crave out of life. And you're right, it's a weird kind of love, right? But that is true for so many of us, where the
Yeah.
people we find that match our weirdness, right?
Yeah. And it's so sweet. And I think it takes everybody by surprise in the town and they're all kind of like, what's going on? But yeah,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
just fits, it
absolutely. And
works.
it goes back to what you were saying, which I think is really lovely about that love really is the theme throughout this whole thing. And that's another relationship of love that is trying to get off the ground, I guess.
Yeah. And kind of to that love story, Bertie and Emiline have a great community looking out for them. And it's kind of like the community is all in love with each other too. And not that it's it doesn't have its downfalls, but there's another scene that I loved that I kept thinking about, and it's the summer solstice scene that you talk about. And it just was so nostalgic because it's Emmeline and she's out there having the best time. And it's one of those times when the kids are out playing and the adults are occupied and you kind of get to do whatever you want and you go home feeling so full and it's like the best kind of tired. And I just love that. I had a few nights like that. Makes me that when I was a kid, it made me think of a
Yeah,
few
absolutely.
experiences like
Yeah.
that. Can you just talk about, do you have any of those memories or do your children have those experiences?
Absolutely. And I would say that Emmeline is probably by far, the most autobiographical character I've ever written.
Oh,
So
interesting.
that those scenes are directly from my childhood. Even
Yeah.
the kids learning how to fill up the cups from the beer taps, you know. So yeah, for me it was like I think from an outside view, maybe some people would have looked and thought like, oh, maybe this isn't an appropriate place for children to be or whatever. But for me, and I think a lot of the kids that I grew up with, it was a feeling of freedom and of being kind of enclosed in a community that you knew cared about you on some level, but you had a lot of freedom within those moments when there was a party like that going on. And summer solstice is a magical time in Alaska. I think that just because of our extremes of light and dark, winter solstice and summer solstice are both something we're all very, very aware of up here. So yeah, all that kind of very much ties into my connections to this place and some of my fondest and sort of oftentimes there's sort of a magical feeling about being up that late and being outside and being right at the edge of the trees where you're right at the edge of the wilderness. And it's a pretty amazing feeling.
That is so cool. I was going to ask you if you had those experiences as a kid, if you celebrated the
Yeah.
summer solstice. Is it like what you wrote about or
Oh
what are they
yeah,
like?
yeah. Yeah, and not even necessarily just on summer solstice, but oftentimes like when the weather would be good, there would be some kind of and it's still that way. I think in a lot of ways, my own daughters have been raised that way in our neighborhood where, you know, we get together, whether it's in the winter or the summer and have an outdoor bonfire and the kids are very much a part of it all. We have sledding parties at our house. So the grown-ups and the kids are all sledding together. So yeah, I think it's kind of a neat feeling. And it was always really foreign to me when I would read books where the children were like sent off to bed while the grown-ups had their grown-up party. That was just not how I experienced life. And yeah, it was very much a part of how I grew up.
Yeah. And I do love it is when you get when you're around those experiences is also when you get like those tools as a kid.
Yeah,
Like I mean, you're joking. That's when you learn how to fill the beer, but it's also like when you learn how to put things back together.
yeah.
Or I mean, I don't. There's just so many things that you don't even think about, but you're like, oh yeah, that happened during then because either we couldn't tell our parents because we were going to get in trouble, or just some other
Yeah,
kid was there and they taught me
exactly.
how to do it, or a
Yeah,
whole other parent came over and
yeah,
taught. Like it's just
yeah.
kind of that community thing, and I
Yeah,
love
and I
those
think
big
even just
gatherings.
learning kind of how to interact in a way, like not interrupting people, but being brave enough to speak up if you want to tell part of a story that they're all talking about, and yeah, I do think it's a time of learning. And I mean, the truth of it is there were also times as a kid that I was a little scared. I mean, things would get kind of wild, and in the solstice scene that you're describing, some of the men are getting pretty drunk and they're building the bonfire bigger and bigger and they're jumping over it. That was a literal memory from my childhood at the time, feeling like, ooh, okay, this is kind of taken another step farther, that maybe I kind of wish I was in bed now instead
Yeah.
of out here with the grown-ups.
Yeah. Do you still talk to those people in your life? Are
You
you like,
know,
is it, what, did you have a community like that?
yeah, I really did. And it was the community that I grew up in, when I was a kid here. Unfortunately, a lot of them have passed away or moved on. Both my parents actually passed away while I was writing this book.
Oh,
And
wow.
so it's a strange kind of bittersweet nostalgia to happen to be kind of entering back into those memories at a
Yeah.
time where, because I'm in my 50s now, so many of those people have either moved away or passed away. There are some still people here. I'm kind of curious to see how they receive it, because I don't know if they ever really thought much about how it was for me as a kid growing up in that
Sure.
environment. So yeah, I'll be curious to hear from some of them.
Yeah. Well, it's so clearly a love story. So hopefully they
Yes.
receive it
Yeah,
well
yeah,
because
hopefully
it's
they'll
not,
understand that.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's painted in a lovely light. May I ask about your parents? If you don't want to talk about it,
Yeah,
we don't
no,
have to.
absolutely. So, I mean, they're actually really kind of a key part of my
Yeah.
writing the story. So my parents were, by the time I was in college, my parents were divorced, and they actually ended up both having cancer, and I was the caretaker for both, the caregiver for both of them as they passed away. And it was like 2019, my mom passed away, 2022, my dad passed away. So it was a kind of a lot. And it was really it was difficult to be losing them as I was trying to write this complicated story about
Yeah.
aspects of my childhood. And as hard as it was to lose them, I don't know that I could have written the book when they were when they were still alive. I once they passed away, I felt a freedom to really kind of enter into the story more honestly on an emotional level. For me, I think I was kind of, they were two of my fans. They loved my books, and they were both very early readers of my books. But this one I didn't share with them as much, and I was nervous about it. And so once I was able to just write the story that I wanted to tell, as hard as it was, that was a good thing for the book, I think.
Yeah. That's really lovely, actually. It's really
Yeah.
beautiful that you were able to find that throughout all of that.
Yeah, yeah, it was, well, and I have to say I had so much patience and compassion for my editors, both in the US. Marianne Harrington and Andrea Walker here in the US were both with me with the Snow Child, wonderful editors. They knew what I was going through, they knew the story I was trying to tell, and they just gave me the time. And I think that's kind of, as a writer, a lesson I learned. Sometimes we've got deadlines, we've got hopes of, goals that we have, and sometimes you just have to let it come when it's ready to be ready.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's definitely books that people read that I've read that I
Mhm.
feel like you can feel that inauthenticity. And I don't think
Yeah.
your book had that. And I guess that's probably why, is you gave yourself that space
Oh, thank you.
to write
Well,
all
it
of
took a
that.
lot of drafts, I have to say.
Yeah.
There were a lot of drafts where I was not writing into that both the sense of magic that we're talking about and wonder, but also the fear that was a part of my childhood. I was afraid to write about that fear. And so I was kind of circling around, and my editors knew it. I don't think they knew how to help me completely get to what I needed to say, but they kept saying, we're not there, keep coming around. And I just had to get closer and closer into that core part of the story, I think.
Yeah. You said the word wonder just then.
Mhm.
And I think when you have people that close to you pass away, I feel like it kind of can sometimes break something open and maybe lets people explore that wonder a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's one of the most challenging times in my life, but also perhaps the most transformative,
Yeah.
in terms of, like you say, it kind of cracks something open. And I think for me, this book felt like, and I hope this doesn't sound too pretentious or something, it felt like taking something very complicated from my life and a part of who I was, that I wrestled with, and then hopefully kind of turned it into some kind of art,
Yeah.
something that felt more than what I had just experienced as a kid. And then I can kind of like set it free to the world in a way that felt it felt really wonderful. It felt like a gift to me, and hopefully other people will get something out of it too.
Yeah, I totally understand that viewpoint, and I that's lovely. I can totally see that in this book. Another character that I loved was he was kind of on the outside, but Sid.
Oh, it's so funny. He's one of the favorite of a lot of the readers that have read it so far, my close friends and things. Sid is a favorite character. We want more Sid.
Yeah. He's just I guess I just know my mom's from Wyoming, I'm from Colorado, so, like, I've
Okay.
not it's not as rural as Alaska, but it is I'm certainly not from rural Colorado, but my mom's from a more rural part, and I kind of have someone that she grew up with that I was like, "Oh, this is kind of like that guy." And it's just, like, he's very thoughtful and very kind and just, like, checks in on everybody, and he it's just always there without judgment. And he,
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
kind of also, I think in very small towns, people kind of have a very collective mindset and are like, no, you shouldn't do that. And it comes from a genuine, lovely, loving
Yeah.
place. But it's
Yeah.
like a we're looking out for you and don't do this. And especially with Birdie, a single mom, where they're just like, no, let me help you and bring Emiline here and don't do this. And Sid was just kind of like a go for it, man. I get
Yeah.
it. Like that's kind of what I mean, he didn't
Yeah, that's
say
exactly
that.
what he says, is
Yeah.
you have to go
Yeah.
after. Yeah, and I think the other thing, and I think this is probably true of a lot of rural areas. Here in Alaska, you I think sometimes I feel like in film and movies and books, we sort of see this stereotype of someone who lives a rural sort of subsistence lifestyle, and they're often sort of depicted as uneducated and unkind, a lot of things. And I that's just so contrary. I mean, certainly I've met people like that, but I've also met so many people who have advanced degrees that they're not using, or that they are using, and they're very intelligent and very well read and interesting. So I was so fun for me to get to write that character that was inspired by so many people, including my own dad, actually. I mean, it's funny because my dad inspired a lot of characters in this book in different ways. And one of them is Sid. I mean, that was an aspect of my dad, someone who loved to read, who loved to build, and was artistic in a lot of ways. So, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's so what a lovely dad. That's so
Yeah, in
sweet.
a lot of ways he was. He was a complicated dad, though.
Sure, sure. Well,
Yeah.
every kid will say that about their
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
about their parent, but yeah, I mean, I just loved and well, we'll get more to that, but just how he just remained in everybody's lives and, it was very sweet. Warren, of course,
Yeah.
is another very sweet character. I don't mean to keep using the word sweet and lovely, but I just
Yeah, no, that makes me happy to hear, because I think other people sometimes struggle liking the characters, I sense, in different ways. And so I love that you're seeing the things that I wanted people to see in them. So, I mean, I think that Warren is a very gentle, kind, loving person, and he's struggling with something very hard as far as like
yeah.
who his son is and what he's capable of. And so I just find that, to me, in my life, knowing all the people I've known in my life, that's just a very real dilemma that people come into, where they want to believe the best about people. They want their children to succeed and find love and all that. And I think that Warren's really conflicted in that situation in that way.
Yeah. He is, but I love when he gets to stand back and watch his son fall in love, which
Yeah,
is something that he never thought would happen.
right.
And he has a lot of apprehension, but he also has
Mhm.
a lot of pride with all
Yeah.
of that. And what do you think it's like for him to observe Arthur and Bertie?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I think that it is that sense that someone who has struggled for so long, and I've certainly had people like that in my life, that you just think, oh, I want them to find happiness. I want them to find love, and that's what we all want out of life. So I can imagine, if you've had a child that has struggled in so many ways, seem to find that kind of peace and joy that comes with love. It's got to be a really overwhelming feeling. And I think that is how it is for Warren, something that maybe he never, like you say, never thought would end up being possible in ways, I think.
Yeah, and he just fully embraces Bertie and Emmeline, and
Yeah,
he finds a lot, and maybe in a way because his children are in the and not in Alaska anymore, so maybe it's a way of him getting to kind of fill that void a little bit too.
I think so. Exactly. And that does happen a lot in Alaska, which again, I think probably happens in other rural areas. A lot of children move away. Actually, both my daughters, so my oldest daughter lives in Montreal, Canada, has her degree and works and lives there. And our youngest daughter is getting ready to graduate, and she's planning on leaving the state as well. So I think that's a common thing that parents in rural areas, you're happy for your kids, but there's a sadness too to watch them go off and leave the area.
Yeah. for sure. I think that happens probably more in rural areas for sure, but all over.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's probably really true. Yeah, actually, yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
My sisters and I all live in very different states, so it's
Yeah, so your parents are feeling this, like, "Come
yeah,
back."
exactly. Absolutely. Sorry, mom. Um, Arthur gives Birdie the sweetest gift where he shows that he really listened to her. And he comes home and he stays there so that she can go exploring. And he literally almost gives up himself for this and for
Yeah.
her. Yeah, can you just talk about that choice?
Well, and that's again, it's funny because in general, Arthur, in terms of his relationship with Emmeline, is inspired by my relationship with my dad, and those things, the kind of fear that I sometimes felt in different things. But that particular aspect of Arthur, of giving that gift, that is very much my husband. So he, like for example, when I first started writing The Snow Child, we had a brand new. I was pregnant and then had a brand new baby, and we had our other daughter was 8. He worked all day, I was home with the kids, but he would come home and he would say, go up to your little writing closet. I'll put away dinner, I'll put the kids to bed, I'll do that, just go write for a couple hours. Again and again in my life, he's given me that gift that can be hard to ask for. As a
Mhm.
mom, it's hard sometimes to make that request. Other times where I've just been like, I need space. I mean, he's driven me by boat out to where I can go camp by myself for days on end. I mean, and leaves me with all my gear that I need because he just knows I need that space. So I think that he's that kind of Sam, my husband, is that kind of person who will encourage me to step outside my comfort zone, but also to go after the things I want, even if it means him taking on a different task or a different responsibility.
That's so lovely. That's such a profound sense of understanding of your partner.
And you're right. That is actually, and I hadn't really quite thought about it that way as far as Arthur and Birdie, but you're right. It's a kind of, and it's got to be a little bit cliche, but it's being seen, right? It's
Yeah.
someone like saying, I see who you really are and what it is you want. And Birdie doesn't want the vase of red roses that the one guy wants to give her, right? When Arthur brings her wildflowers or whatever it is, he sees who she really is.
It's true, and it's also, I think, for me anyway, it was not turning point necessarily, but maybe a better view. You don't see what's inside people's relationships, you know? And I think
Yeah.
it was like a way to see inside of it because the whole time I kind of was on the community side where I was like, "What are you doing?"
Yeah.
And I see it and
Right.
like you understand it because you're like, I understand the pull and all of that, but like, really, is this really okay? And I was kind of reading the book a little bit through covered eyes, just being like, "Oh my God, what's gonna happen?" And then I read that part and I was like, "Oh wow." They really like for me it was like a moment to be like, oh, this is a true partnership and he sees her and understands her. And that was like a really beautiful moment in the book.
Oh, well, thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I do think it's hard to, it was a challenge for me to try to put the pieces into this relationship where Arthur can be who he really is, but still, and Birdie be who she really is, but they can connect on some level. And I think you've really pinpoint in a nice way some of those moments. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Another line that struck me from the book was it was impossible what Bertie wanted to go alone, to experience the world on her own terms, but also to share it all with Emmeline. I would imagine this is any mother's conflict, but also Bertie's specifically being a young mom.
Yeah.
Can you speak to this part?
Yeah, I do think I mean, I shouldn't speak for all moms. I think there's all different moms enjoy different aspects of parenting on different levels and different times, but certainly for me, that was something as I was raising my 2 daughters, I love being with them and I love sharing the Alaska wilderness with them and doing all kinds of things, talking about books with them or whatever. But there were times where I just wanted to be me, just be me the way I was before I had kids or whatever. So I do think it's a complicated thing. And I think parents are often and I will say, I think moms are very criticized or critiqued on whether they give up enough of themselves or too much. You know what I mean? Whatever we do, I think sometimes as moms, it's not quite the right thing. And I see that with Birdie struggling to figure out. And of course, she doesn't really have a mother figure to sort of follow after. How am I going to be a mom? And she's trying so hard to be who she is. While also, I feel like she genuinely loves Emmeline very, very much.
Yeah, and she talks about I guess she does talk about that a little bit too because she's talking about, she was at the bar and had that crazy night, as the story
Mhm.
opens. And then she did say, she brought just a little bit of alcohol just for when she needs it. She brought a couple packs of cigarettes, but you can see where she really is
She's
trying.
trying.
Yeah.
She's
For
trying hard.
herself and for Emmeline. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
More about Birdie. I find her to be extremely brave and very resourceful. And I do think she's a great role model for Emily, kind of exactly what we're talking about in the way that, in that way of her resourcefulness and her bravery. And I don't think she sees herself that way at all.
No, I agree.
But she comes in, she takes Birdie and they go to the cabin and she comes in and she cleans it up and she gets the lanterns going and she puts the mosquito net on and she just sets up a home for themselves. And she just really leans into the life and makes it a life for them and makes it an adventure. How do
Yeah.
you want people to view Birdie?
This is so touching to me because I worried about there's so much discussion about likable versus unlikable characters, and I think that certainly some of the choices that Birdie makes could open her to criticism, but that is absolutely how I see her, as someone who she views this as an opportunity to make her life better and her daughter's life better, and she's putting everything into it. And I do see her as someone who is brave and maybe sometimes a little bit of a daredevil and to a flaw, a fault,
Yeah.
maybe, and definitely wanting to buck any oversight or having someone tell her what to do. That's not going to happen. And I have to say, there's a little bit of me in there. I mean, there's a little bit of everybody. Like, we all feel that way to some
Sure.
extent, right? Like,
Yeah.
we don't want to be bossed around. And I think she's
Yeah.
got that kind of youthful energy of, don't tell me what to do. I can do this, And I think that's another way that she and Arthur connect, because Arthur lets her. He has no desire
Yeah.
to teach her how to do things or be bossy to her. He's just like, okay, go
Yeah.
start the fire. I'm not going to do it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. He's like, you go get your own food and I'll be gone. Yeah. I mean, she's also quite young too. She's 26, right? And so I think that that's also part of it. I think
Yeah.
there's also, it's funny. I feel like when you're younger, you have a different kind of bravery. Not that you can't be brave when you're older, but I feel like there is something
Absolutely.
in your 20s when you're like, you don't have enough
Go for it.
context.
Yeah.
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 And
No,
you don't have enough
absolutely.
context to be afraid.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do think that's an interesting discussion too, as far as just the age of parents. I mean, I think, I was 26 when I had my first child, a baby's at 26. And then, I was older, 8 years older later. And I think we parent slightly differently. Our lives are different, whether we're in our 20s or our 30s or 40s. So I think that is certainly an element of who Birdie is her age.
Yeah. Yeah. So later on, after everything happens, Emmeline goes back to Alaska.
Yeah.
And she finds the same community as they're welcoming her back with open arms. And
Hmm.
she's with Warren at one point, and
Hmm.
he thinks, and I quote, "It was bewildering how closely grief ran alongside joy. The trip is healing for both of them in ways that neither of them are expecting.
Yeah.
And she got to see a bit more and remember things, and he got to get rid of some of his shame and guilt.
Yeah.
And can you just speak to that relationship as Emmeline's older?"
Yeah, in each book that I've written, there's some relationship that surprises me. So, like, a lot of things I kind of have planned, like roughly planned out in my head, as I'm going into a book. The relationship between Emmeline and Warren was a complete surprise to me. And I was so happy when it happened. It's funny because I don't necessarily feel like, I know some authors will talk about, like, oh, the characters talk to me. I'm not quite at that level of my imagination is not quite that strong, I guess. But sometimes I create characters, and as I put them in the same room together, all of a sudden, as I just let them be who I've and let them become along the way, and they start interacting, it can create some wonderful surprises. And that's probably one of my happiest surprises in that book, is their true. I think you're left feeling that this is going to be a long-term friendship or relationship, and I think that's a good thing at the end. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, well, this kind of goes into my next question, so I'll read this one. Emmeline gets to have a little bit of a reckoning with herself and the past that she thought she remembered versus what actually happened.
Yeah.
And it's funny how we can hold on. I think we all do this. We hold on to such guilt, and one conversation that we have with someone can totally change. And I think that's what happens with Warren for both of them. It's, him saying, "No, that's not what happened. You did this." And I think for her whole life, they had both carried around that guilt.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and I think that it can be really, and I think those, if you have siblings or cousins or whatever, and you talk about things, even just non-traumatic, simple things that happened when you all were kids, how differently you can remember things, and how malleable memory is, and how who we think of ourselves as affects our memories, and vice versa. So there's a funny interplay there, I think. And there was a time, I think actually once I had kids and I had a child that was the age that I'm remembering Emmeline at now, that I struggled so much with sort of making sense of what I was seeing in my family. once I had a child that age, I had a new compassion for my old 6-year-old self, right? Because
Yeah.
you see that it's a child that really has no choices in the whole situation, whatever that is, whatever their family decides to take and do with them, or go to wherever they go. The kid's along for the ride. And I don't know that I really appreciated that and could sort of look at my own child through those eyes until I was around kids that age and was kind of like, oh, okay, that's what a 6-year-old is like, and how, in ways, how intelligent they are and insightful, but also how powerless and naive in ways they are too.
Yeah. It can break your heart a little bit.
Yeah, no, it can actually.
At least it does. I don't have kids, but I have a lot of kids in my life, and it's
Yeah,
funny, like being at like different ages that I remember things when they hit that age. Not babies, but like 8 to
yeah,
8 and up.
yeah.
When they get those ages, you're like, oh, you're such a little guy. I
I
can't believe I was that
know.
age when I experienced
Yeah,
that.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I think as kids, we think of ourselves, at least I remember thinking like, I'm like a grown up, right?
Oh, for sure.
You,
Yeah,
like in your head, you're like,
yeah,
I can take this on. And then you look back and you're like, oh, but you really aren't a grown up, you know?
yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's important for all of us who whatever experience we have to be able to kind of look back on our childhoods with that compassion for ourselves. And forgiveness, or whatever, love for that little child that we once were.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually have been thinking about that a lot. I don't know why, but I've been in some weird like nostalgic mindset recently. And it is like you also see, I think it's also the other side of that too, where you look at kids that age and you're like, I can't believe that you also at the same time can handle all of that stuff,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, the kind of resiliency that so many
Yes.
show.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it is remarkable, I think. And yeah, I've certainly have seen that with kids that, go through difficult times, and you think, wow, it's amazing what they can survive. Not even just survive, but thrive within,
Yeah. Yeah. And figure out like I think, Emmeline to bring it back to the book,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
Emmeline does have that, she's 6 and then, when Warren gets her and all of that. And, she's 6 years old and she has the wherewithal to be like, this is what I know, this is what I remember, this is what I was taught. And it also just shows how they don't have a lot of context, young children. And so they really do remember what you tell them because that's kind of the only thing
absolutely.
that they're learning. So
Well, and it's funny because, there's a part where Emmeline says, even very at the very beginning of the book, I think she even references it about how she was told that there was once a little boy that got lost in the woods, and he all he had was a bag of marshmallows, and he stayed. Well, this was a story that was told to me when I was a
oh
little
really?
girl, and it was funny you mentioned Colorado, because I that was actually born in Denver, Colorado, and we lived my first 3 or 4 years there, and then we moved to Alaska. And it was in Colorado where apparently I've actually meant to always Google it, but apparently there was a story of a child that got lost in the woods on a camping trip, had a bag of marshmallows, stayed where he was supposed to. And my dad would always tell me that story. And it stayed. I mean,
Yeah.
huge. He might not even have remembered that he told me the story.
Yeah.
But like you say, as a kid, you've got such little pieces that you're getting, and you're like, okay, this is something I need to hold on to and remember.
Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you want readers to take away from the book?
No, I am just absolutely delighted and touched with how you read it, to be honest.
Oh, thank you.
It's a scary, I think, especially for something that's so personal to me, of any book that I've written, any writing, I mean, essays, anything. This is the most personal, like the deepest cut into my heart, right, that I'm sharing with the world. So it's a little bit nerve-wracking, to be honest. And so to have someone read it, frankly, so intelligently and compassionately, is very, very touching to me, and I really
Oh,
appreciate
thank
it.
you. Thank you so much. I usually look for this, but I didn't see it because I have an arc.
Oh,
May I
yeah.
ask who you dedicated it to? I'm always so
Well,
curious
I
about
didn't
this.
dedicate it to anyone,
Oh,
actually.
sorry.
Yeah, no, that's why. What I ended up doing instead was the Marcel Proust quote at the
Oh,
beginning,
I did see that in there. Yeah.
which was the inspiration for the title, which
Mhm.
I would love to say that I came up with the title, but the publisher at Random House actually came up with it because I was struggling. And in that quote from Marcel Proust that's within the book too, he found it. No, I felt awkward. It's kind of there's a lot that happens in this book, and it felt like a
Sure.
strange book to dedicate. We had this discussion actually with my editors about who to dedicate it to, and I just thought I'm not really comfortable dedicating it to anyone. We had talked about dedicate. I think the closest we got is I did think about dedicating it to Alaska, because I feel like it is, as we mentioned, it's kind of my love song, my complicated love song to Alaska.
Yeah. That's lovely. And the quote is great. I did love that one. Well, we are a bookstore, so I have to ask this question. Do you
Yes.
have any favorite, do you have an all-time favorite book or books, or do you have like a really great recent read?
Okay. Oh gosh, this is a dangerous thing because I
I
used to be
know.
a bookseller. I was
Oh,
a
that's true. I know.
bookseller.
Yes, you probably have a
So,
lot.
I will say that the book that really made me want to write, like I always loved to read fiction, but the book that made me want to write fiction was Love Medicine by Louise Erdrich. It was kind of a game changer, a life changer for me as a writer. But I will say too that my oldest daughter and I, she challenges me to read things that I wouldn't necessarily like I've wanted to read. So this past summer, she and I had this great thing where we paired a couple books. So we read, and this was definitely on her urging. She's 25. So we read Dickens' David Copperfield and then read Demon Copperhead, which was
Oh,
really fun.
nice. Cool.
Then we read Emily Wilson's new translation of the Odyssey and then
Mhm.
read Ulysses, which was like, oh, it was
Wow.
amazing though. And I also read the most dangerous book, I think it's called, that's about a sort of a biography of Ulysses, how it came to be published and its challenges in publishing and things. So yeah, so those were a couple. So next up, we're going to do Huckleberry Finn and of course Percival Everett's
Yeah.
James. Yeah,
James,
it
yeah.
would be really fun to
It's
pair those together, I think. So.
great book. That is not very light summer reading. You guys
Well,
really go
yeah,
for it.
yeah. Ulysses was like there were times when we were because she actually had to be. She was home on a visit from Montreal when we were reading parts of it, and I was like, I wouldn't have. I don't know that I would have gotten through Ulysses without her. It was a team effort, a lot of talking through it.
Yeah.
But
That's
it was
so
great. It was
fun.
so much. It was really fun. I love that kind of being challenged to read beyond maybe what I, as a lazy reader, would sometimes read.
Yeah. Absolutely. And to pair it like that is so fun.
Oh, it was really fun. Yeah, it
Yeah.
added so much dimension to it. Yeah,
Yeah.
in
That's
both
cool.
cases. Yeah, it was really fun.
Well, thank you so much for talking with me today. I've really
Thank
enjoyed chatting
you.
with you.
I
It's been
really enjoyed
lovely.
talking. Yeah, I really wonderful questions. Yeah, and I so appreciate the reading of the book. I really, really great. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you so much. And everybody go out and grab the book. You will love it. It's out now and it's wonderful. And the cover's wonderful too.
Oh,
Enjoy.
I know. I think the cover is absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, it is.
So thrilled with it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Allison.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.